is Shelley here. Welcome to my channel and thank you for joining me today. So today I thought I'd come on here and share with you how I colour grass. So I have been requested by a couple of people, mainly after they saw how I did my grass in Teresa Goodridge's, I think it was Village Charm. And they requested me to show how I do my grass. And so I thought I'd come on here and share it on this page that I'm doing in Teresa Goodridge's Country Charm. Sorry for the glare there. And so yeah, I've done this part of the grass up there. I have used this page, you might have seen it before in another how I colour video for how I colour wood. So hopefully I'll try and remember and put it in the description box below. But today what I'm going to try and do is just share with you how I do my grass, basically. I do it a lot in Teresa Goodridge's books, but I use pretty much the same steps and techniques in other books, mainly when there's a large area of grass. So I'll zoom in and we'll get started. Okay, so my technique of colouring grass is pretty simple, just like all my techniques for colouring different elements. But the main thing is always to have like any other thing that you're colouring on a page is a dark tone, a medium tone and a light tone. So my dark tone I have chosen is chrome oxide green. My medium tone is permanent green olive, and my light tone is going to be May green. May green. Now I'm using my Faber Castell Albrecht Dürer pencils, which are the regular pencils I use in pretty much every page I colour that you've seen on the channel. And yeah, I will be using them. They are watercolour pencils, so I will in this case be using them activated with water for the basing. Because it helps cover the whites of the paper, it helps with the blending and just speeds up the process really of blending. Especially, I use this especially for large areas. Now, as I've mentioned before, I like to have additional couple of colours other than the 3 shades of green, and so I sort of have I've picked out a medium, sort of not a medium, but a light tone green, but between the permanent green and May green, so that's earth green yellowish, which I'll also be using, and another shadow which is Payne's grey, which will just deepen up my shadow areas in the areas of the darkest shadows, but I'll show you all of that. And for my grass I like to just add hints of a little bit of yellow sometimes, and so I'm going to be using the light yellow ochre. I don't want something too bright, but I like to put in a hint of yellow sometimes. Now these are not the greens I always use for grass. I will change it up. I'll use some of my other greens. I'll use more of the olivey greens or the chromium green opaque and things like that, but these are mostly my go-to greens, but I can't show you every single combination of green I would use, so I'm going to go for the one I use most often, and these are the ones I use. All right, so we'll get started. Like I said, I'm using my Faber Castell Albrecht Dürer pencils, and I'm going to start with putting down a base. Okay, so I'm using my medium tone green, which we set out, which I just showed you, which is the permanent green olive. And what I do is I start off with the areas that I think will be in shadow. So for example, around the artist usually will, in majority of cases, you'll see that they'll add little hints of grass effects, and I'll try and use those to sort of create my shadow areas and my highlight areas. So for example, there's a squiggle placed here by Teresa Goodridge, what I like to do is use that as areas of grass that are going to be standing up and therefore highlight, and so the area just behind it will be in a little bit of a shadow. So I'll use that as sort of mapping out areas where there will be a darker green placed. And I'll try and leave areas of highlight uncolored to begin with until I come in with my pencils dry. So under these flowers, I would say that if light was coming in from the top, whether it's coming straight or sideways, I'm not going to go into too much detail about the direction it's coming from, but I know it's going to be coming from there because that's where I've zoomed in a lot, but that's where the sky is. So I would assume that the light will be coming from there. And so I'm going to create a bit of a shadow here, but I want these little strands, hopefully you can see, these little strands of grass, blades of grass, maybe is the right word, to be in highlight. So I'm not going to pull my mid-tone green into those areas, okay? And then these areas behind these grass blades, I'm just going to put in shadow again. All right. So that's sort of how I start to map out where my shadow areas are going to be, where my highlight areas are going to be. Now we have little stones here. So again, like I said, the light is coming from the top. And so it would be hitting the little stone here and will create a shadow underneath the stone. We want to make this stone look like it's 3D and standing isn't, you know, 3D and looks like it's popping off the grass. So we're going to make a little bit of a shadow underneath those stones. So it's quite random in a way that I place down the colors. So I use the idea that we have grass drawn in for us by the artist, and I try and create my shadows behind those little grass blades that are sticking up, and I try and make the grass blades the lightest part. So here we have the grass blades. So again, I'm going to create my shadow behind these little squiggles of grass. I don't know if what I'm saying is making sense. Hopefully it is. But I'm literally just mapping out where all my shadows are sort of going to be. This area is going to be, because those are the grass blades, and like I said, I'll keep those the lightest shade. So I decided to just go dark here, come up light. Yeah. And then here, so we have again some grass blades. So we're going to, blades of grass. So we're going to just again create my shadow areas behind them. We have a stone here, a stone there. So this is basically just putting down the base layer for a large area of grass. Now, obviously, if the area of grass was a lot less, then you don't need to necessarily do basing. Or you don't need to do basing at all if you don't want to, if you want to blend with your pencils all the way. But I find it useful trying to put down a base layer with my pencils, activated with water, and then coming in. Now, this is basically what I do. So I just sort of map out my areas of where the areas are going to be a bit darker on the grass, and then I work with that and see if I need to add any more areas of darker grass. Yeah, and then we have grass, blades of grass here, so I'm just going to make a bit of the shadow here. But in front of the dog's face, we can see a few, flicks of the grass. So I want to keep those in highlight. So I'm just going to make sure I don't bring the color all the way up. So it's useful to sort of try and see where the artist is, how they're drawing in, you know, certain elements, and they do sort of hint at where the highlights would be, and you know, you can use it to your advantage in knowing where to put your highlights and your shadows. So these are blades of grass again, so I'm going to make this area dark, and then I'll be going lighter into those. Okay, so again, this area here in front of the dog will be little flicks of grass, so I want to keep those light. So I'll just go dark at the bottom here. Hopefully just watching me do it will make more sense than how I'm trying to explain it, but there we go. All right, let's do this bit. So again, they're, you know, the blades of grass standing up around the leg of the decking, and so I am going to just sort of create a random shadow there because I want there to be a highlight. going up into those blades of grass. Yeah, this helps with the 3D effect as well, and just gives a bit of interest rather than having a flat color of green. I don't know where to do the shadow, but I want to make the grass look like it's under the decking. Obviously the decking would create a shadow, so I'm just going to create a dark the shadow area there, going into a highlight area here. So sometimes it's just a little bit random. Yeah, I'm going to just add a bit of darkness. So I've sort of mapped out, especially in this area, where my darker areas are going to be. It's not very neat, I'm just sort of marking out the areas, but it doesn't have to be uniform, it doesn't have to be perfect. You just want to help with the 3D effect. You want to help with just creating a difference in the tones of greens you're using for the grass. That's okay. So what I do next then is I go in with my light tone. Yeah, which is the May green. And now I just work and blend it into my midtone. So this is now pretty easy. I don't go all the way into the areas that are uncolored, so I leave uncolored areas where my brightest highlights are going to be, or where I'm going to put in hints of maybe the yellow, the light yellow ochre, because after I've activated, I'm still going to go over with pencil, and some of those highlight areas are going to disappear, are going to get covered up with pencils. So I try to not go all the way into the highlight areas fully. So while I'm popping this May green in, so literally I'm just blending from my midtone outwards, I'll just put this to music, all right? Okay, so I've put my mid-tone and a light tone down, and now I'm going to use water to activate the pencils. You can use a water brush. I am using a water brush, but this one is a bit blocked, so I do dip it in water. It's a very old one, but I had snipped the end of it, like I've mentioned before, and so I like to still use it. And so I just dip it in water, and I have a tissue on the side or a paper towel, and just to dab off the excess water. I don't use much water. So a lot of people ask me again, how do you use your Albrecht Dürer pencils activated with water in you know, on thin paper? Like I use it on Amazon paper as well. I don't use much water. These pencils are gorgeous. You don't need to use much water to activate them. They, you know, very little water works brilliant. As you can see, I haven't been adding water. I'm literally just sort of dabbing off my brush on this side, like that, just because I want to maintain my highlight area. So I start blending from my highlight areas into my darker areas, and then I go in and I just sort of dab off my paintbrush. I still have a bit of water on it, and I go in again, but that's so that I don't pull any of the colors that I have, that I've, you know, when I went over in the dark areas, I don't pull it into my highlight areas, okay? So that's why you always see my hand sort of go off screen. But yeah, I'm blending from my highlight into my dark areas like that. I still haven't added any more water, guys. So you don't need to use much water. Some people say, oh, you know, sometimes the pencils go through the other side. They shouldn't. Sometimes they can, it's thin paper, but it hasn't on this one. But I think it depends on how much water you're using, to be honest. If you use a lot of water, yes, they will bleed through, on thin paper especially. Probably not in many of the other good quality books, but yeah. So I'll just do the rest of this to music again. So that's the base layer activated. Now, just a couple of things. Obviously, you need to wait for it to dry before you go in with anything else. Like if you're going to go in with the pencils dry, you need to let it dry, okay? And the other thing I wanted to mention, yes, if you like this watercolor effect, like I like to go in with my pencils dry, you don't need to. You can already see that there is a good variation in the greens there. Now, if you like the watercolor effect, what I would also, in it before activating, what I would have done in addition would be to go in with my dark tone green, which is the chrome oxide green. And where I had laid down, obviously, my mid-tone, in the shadow areas is where I would add on top of my mid-tone the dark tones, and then I would activate with the water. So that would give you even more contrast between your dark and light areas, and you don't need to go in with the pencils then if you like that finish of the watercolor effect. So just something to keep in mind if you are using watercolor pencils and you want to keep the watercolor effect. You can go in with your 3 tones of green from the word go and then activate it with water, and it will still give you the nice variation in the greens. As you can see here, just make sure you maintain the highlight areas. Don't cover it up with the water because it's very easy to pull your greens into the light areas. Yeah. Now, like I said, I go in with my pencils dry because I like that look, and I just want to give myself more work. So I'm gonna go now with my dark tone, which is the chrome oxide green. Okay, and I know where my dark areas are now because I've sort of laid it out with my mid-tones, and so I'm going to start going in and just adding in my dark tones, okay? So giving more of my contrasts and in the shadow areas. Sorry, darkening up my shadow areas so that it'll help give the contrast, all right? So that's what I'm going to do now. Of course, make sure the paper is dry. Now, I have mentioned in a previous video of how I use my watercolor pencils, that you can use dry pencils on wet paper, but you have to be conscious of what the quality of the paper is. If it's a thin paper, it's not going to work. You'll tear right through the paper if the paper is still wet and you color over it with dry pencils. So I would definitely recommend making sure you use good quality paper if that's the technique you want to use. So on paper like this, it's still quite a decent paper, but it is, you know, a thin paper. So I wouldn't color with dry pencils on wet paper in this book. So basically, I'm just going in now and adding in my dark tones. So I'm keeping in mind where the blades of grass are, where my shadow, where I had sort of mapped out my shadow areas with my mid-tone, which was the permanent green olive, and I'm just starting to add in my darker tone just over the base now. Yeah. I didn't go in with my dark to begin with because layering certain colors on top of each other does give a different interest to your colors. It doesn't look as flat, so putting that permanent green olive underneath, it's a bit of a brighter green. It sort of helps. I think it just helps make sure the color doesn't look too flat if I went in straight with the chrome oxide green. So that's why I like doing that. That's why I like layering up. Now again, you can do the same technique I'm using if you don't have Albrecht Dürer pencils or any watercolor pencils and you want to use dry pencils. Absolutely fine. You didn't need to activate with water, so you could go in with your pencils like I did. It just takes a bit more time blending with your pencils. That's it. So you just go over and blend, and if you're using pencils that are not layering pencils, then you don't need to layer. You can start. You can just sort of blend it all together, I'm sure, pretty easily. Like from what I've heard, for example, with Prismacolors, they blend very quickly. So yeah, you can use the same technique and not have to activate the pencils to create your base. Yeah, you can just keep working with the pencils to blend everything in together. It just takes a little bit longer. So yeah, it does help having that base because it's sort of blended all those, you don't see the pencil strokes once you've blended with the water or activated with the water. You cover up those areas where you wanted it covered up with pencil. You've covered up the whites of the paper, which helps. So yeah, I think it does make it faster. Obviously, I still layer a lot more on top of the base, so I still do take a while, but these steps are not necessary. Like I said, you could have gone in straight with your 3 shades of green, activated it and left it at that if you wanted. But I'm just showing you my technique because I was asked how I did my grass, so I'm just showing you what I do. Yeah. So literally just sticking to the areas where we'd marked out with the mid-tone as being areas that will have darker shades of grass. And I'm not pulling it too much into the highlight areas. I'm sort of leaving an area of the mid-tone green. So I'm not pulling it all the way. So say, for example, here, hopefully you can see there is the border or the line of the mid-tone, and then you can see it going into the light tone. I'm not pulling my dark tone all the way to that and I can't find the words, but basically the connection of the mid-tone and the light tone, that's not the right word, but that's what came to mind. But basically that junction, interaction between the two colors, I don't know, words are not coming to me right now, but hopefully you know what I mean, yeah? So I'm not pulling it all the way to my light tone, I'm just stopping short of where my mid-tone stops. Okay. And again, I'm going to still come in with another dark tone, another shadow color, which is my Payne's Gray. Again, that's not necessary if you don't want to do that. This is already giving you the shadows and highlights. So if you wanted to just work with the 3 shades of green, dark tone, medium tone, and light tone, that's absolutely fine. Now, I've said that the way I've developed my coloring is that I like to intensify my shadow areas, and I like to keep my highlight areas light if possible. And so I'm not able to stop at this stage, and that's why I choose an even darker shadow pencil to deepen up my shadows. But it's not necessary. The ones which I would say definitely you should do is choosing your 3 tones of green, and that's perfectly fine. That area I would say would be in shadow because of the branches and all, and we want it to look like it's behind this bunch of flowers and behind the dog. Nice fluffy dog. Hopefully when I come to color that I can make it look fluffy, because it looks fluffy the way Teresa Goodridge has done the strokes of the pencil work. I hope I can reproduce that. So again, right now I'm limiting myself to the areas I had marked out as definite shadows, and then if necessary, if it's a really large area and I need to add more areas of dark just to give that variation in the grass, then I would. But right now I'm literally just restricting myself to the areas I'd sort of marked out as going to be in shadow. Hopefully this video is going to be useful. I know it's probably a pretty simple thing to color, but it's sometimes nice to see how someone does it, because it just gives you some ideas sometimes. Like, I would gladly watch how I color videos still, because everyone does things differently, and there's always something you can pick up on or try out yourself, see if you like it. So yeah, hopefully you enjoy watching this. I'm going to put a bit of shadow here. I didn't earlier, but I want those leaves to look like it's in the foreground. So I'm just adding a bit of shadow behind them like that. I really like putting these shadows under the stones because I love seeing them just suddenly pop off, like as if they are standing out, like they are 3D. So whenever there's like little stones or pebbles in grass and stuff, I just really enjoy just putting that little bit of color, a little bit of shadow color underneath them, and they just look like this popping out of the page. It's okay if you sort of go over these little flicks of grass that an artist has drawn in, because the way I'm going to do it, the technique I use paint pens to sort of emphasize those little flicks, and you'll see me do that at the end of the video. When I finish the pencil work, I'll go in with the paint pens and show you how to do that, or how I do that. So if it does go over a little bit, that's fine. You'll bring back that little bit of highlight with those paint pens. The watercolor pencils, I'm sure a lot of you do know if you have used them. I'm sure a lot of you use a lot more mediums than I do, but with watercolor pencils, when you have paper that's quite smooth, like this paper here is quite smooth, it would limit the number of layers you can put if you're using layering pencils, if you like doing layering. And so with smooth paper, it does struggle, but if you do a little bit of a base layer like we just did, and activate it with water, it changes the texture of the paper a little bit, so it just gives it a bit of a roughness in those areas, just sort of like as if it's giving you a little bit more tooth, which is what I feel. So it just gives you a little bit of roughness, so it really helps with then being able to go back in and add more layer. So sometimes if you're struggling with smooth paper with certain pencils, try creating a base like that. If you have a watercolor medium like watercolor pencils, or maybe even just normal watercolor paints, Neocolor 2s maybe, if you were taking it off the crayon itself or off a palette, instead of just coloring it onto the page, use it off a palette and paint it on. I think with Neocolor 2s or, you know, water-soluble crayons, it's a little bit different because they're quite waxy. So if you were coloring directly on the paper, I think it might be a bit difficult to color over them. But yeah, it does help. So like this paper, for example, I find quite smooth for the Albrecht Dürers, in that sometimes I can't put that much layer. And so if you activate and create that base, then you usually can add a bit more layer again, more layers over the top, because it just roughens the paper a little bit more. All right, now that has just emphasized the shadow areas a bit more, hasn't it? I've been quite light-handed. You know, when I'm coloring on camera, I try and do it fast, especially when I'm doing it live, which is why I tend to voice over my color alongs, because it takes me a while. Like, so I've gone quite fast for me, and so I haven't put down as much color and in certain areas, but that's okay. I don't want to waste your time, so that's fine. You're getting an idea, which is the main thing. All right, so now that just shows you, I just stood up, so if the voice has changed a little bit or become louder, it's just because I can't see the screen, so I'm just checking what it looks like on screen. And just adding that the dark tone green has just emphasized those areas, hasn't it? It looks really good now. And so like, that's why I said, if you're using just the 3 shades of green, a dark tone, a medium tone, and a light tone, that's perfect. You don't need to do much more. But it's me, and I like to just keep going. So I'll show you my technique, but if you like those 3 shades, you can stop at this point, and then when we come to finish off with doing the paint pens, you can then sort of, you know, join in when I'm doing the paint pens. So I'm just going to show you the extra little bit more coloring and layers that I put on, and then you can and then I'll get to the paint pen or the finishing off of the grass. So now I'm using my other light tone that I had shown you, which was the earth green yellowish, so just a slightly darker one than the May green, the May green. And I'm just going over and just sort of blending in a little bit into the lighter areas, because I like this effect actually. But obviously now that I've done the top part of the grass a little bit more intense in color, that's what I'm going to do here. But so I'm just sort of blending out into the highlight areas from my dark tone. Just trying to do it really quickly. So this is an extra step you don't necessarily need to do, but it's like a slightly different shade of green, so it just gives a bit more interest to the colors that are on there, I think. Well, I like it. All right, and you can go into a bit more light-handedly into your light areas. Yeah, you don't need to leave the whites of the paper now. So this is where I would now normally go into my lights of the light areas that I've left uncolored, but lightly. So maybe medium pressure where my dark tone is, blending out, getting lighter handed to my highlight areas. So there's just a little bit of color that deposits in the highlight areas. That's basically what I'm doing. So a bit more pressure in my dark areas, blending out and becoming slightly lighter handed. So medium pressure, blending out into my highlight, and just getting lighter handed. Yeah, because we don't want the highlight areas to become too green or too intense a green. You want to maintain that contrast between your dark areas and your light areas. So just use a light pressure, but I still want to cover up the whites of the paper. So that's why I'm going into the highlight areas. But by doing it this way and not having that layer down, the base layer down, just sort of allows you to have a bit more control of your highlight areas, so you can see that you're not putting too much color into them, I think. Just try and do it really quick. I didn't use a pencil extender. It is cramping my hand a little bit. Yesterday I was working, and so sometimes, depending on what treatments I have on my day of work, my hands are a little bit tired the next day. So it depends on what I have going on at work. My right hand does get a little bit tired. I know it sounds funny, but so like right now I feel like my hand is just aching a little bit doing this bit because the pencil is a little bit small. Okay, so I'm doing a very light layer, like literally I'm not really pressing hard. You don't need to. The whites of the paper have been covered already with your base layer, so you're not trying to do that much blending out to cover up the whites of the paper. Just adding a little bit of this color everywhere. Okay, just give me a second. Sorry guys, should have been a bit more organized. I'm just going to get my pencil extender. All right, there we go, that's better. I'm trying to be as fast as I can, so it's not going to be perfect blending. Like I always say in some of these How I Like Color videos, that the blending is not perfect in the video. Don't worry. I'm a slow colorist. I would take my sweet time if I was coloring on my own. I'd be listening to some music or to a podcast or, you know, things like that. And I would just take my sweet time and not worry about rushing to get the page done. But here, I don't want you guys to be sitting for such a short How I Color video, or something that should be a short video turning into like hours long. Okay, so you get the idea. Okay, now here, there's quite a bit of a white highlight area. So what I want to do is just bring in some of this green, I think. Little bit, very light-handed. I'm going to be bringing in a bit of yellow still. If you remember, I showed you the light yellow ochre. So I'll be using that in the light area. So again, I'm doing a very light hand, just a hint of the color. Yeah. All right, good. That's done. Now, because it's me, I'm going in with a darker shadow color. It's not necessary. You can see the contrast already. But in certain areas that are very dark, I like to dark, or I would think that have a bigger, you know, a darker shadow, I like to put in a bit more shadow. So I'm using my Payne's Gray just to deepen up the shadows in certain areas. So like here behind these larger blades or longer blades of grass, behind the leg of the decking, I want to create that shadow. I want to create that depth on the illustration. I want to try and create more of a 3D effect, and it helps, I think, just to deepen up your shadows. So that's what I'm doing. So I'm not going in all areas, but you can see it does have a little bit of an effect, right? I hope I don't just give myself extra work. But there we go. Yeah, so I'm just going into the shadow areas and just darkening up certain shadow areas. I want to darken up this area. And then here, behind this bunch of flowers, looks good, a bit darker. Maybe here again, because maybe these blades of grass are a little bit longer, just darken up those shadows. That's nice. And here again, just to give it more of a 3D effect. You can see I'm not really pulling out that much. And definitely, I like to make my little stones and pebbles pop off the page. So darken up the shadow just underneath those stones with the Payne's Gray. Yeah, that looks good, doesn't it? Hopefully. A bit of more shadow here. Yeah, it just helps with a little bit of the 3D effect of the grass. A bit more shadow here where the leaves would cast a shadow, and behind these leaves again. So you don't need to do it in all the areas that you have marked out as shadow areas with your mid-tone and dark tone. So it's just in certain areas I like to use it, yeah? Underneath the table here to make it look like it's definitely, the decking is not table, the decking is creating a shadow. It's blocking the sun from getting to that part of the grass, yeah. Okay, so rough idea, yeah, of what I would do to deepen up my shadows if you wanted to. And then I go in with a little bit of yellow. Now again, it's not necessary, not all grass has yellow in it, but I like to just very light-handed sort of just add a bit of hints of yellow again, just to give a bit of interest to the grass. So very light-handed actually. You can see how I'm holding my pencil, not putting much pressure. I'm not like scribbling, very light-handed, just to give hints. I don't want it to be too yellow. I just want a little bit of hint of yellow. Now, I don't know if it really shows through on an illustration, but when I look at the page, it does give a little bit of a difference. Now, these areas, it would show up more because you left the highlight areas from the beginning. So you can just add a bit of yellow there, and it makes it more obvious in those areas. But very lightly, you don't want, unless you obviously want yellow grass, but I just want hints. See, I would spend a bit more time. I don't think that's blended in well. I've just been quite quick, but I would spend a bit more time blending that area. See, I'm just very randomly putting this yellow, light yellow ochre in. I still want the grass to look green and lovely. I think it does have a bit of an effect, doesn't it? Having the yellow. Hopefully it shows on camera. All right. Okay, that gives you an idea again. Yeah? So let me just have a look. Yeah, that pretty much gives you an idea of how I do the pencil work for my grass. And now I'm going to get to the finishing touches of how I do grass and how I love just adding a little bit of pops of color to my grass in certain, illustrations. I don't do it in all, but I think in an illustration like this, I know you can't see the whole page, but I like to add those little pops of color just to give it a bit of interest, especially when it's such a big area of green, just to break up that green, especially if you have like green, a large area of green grass, lots of trees, lots of bushes, things like that. It sort of helps in my mind just to add a bit of pop of color. And so I'll show you how I do that next. Okay, so I have my Tooli-art paint pens. You guys probably know by now, if you've watched my channel, that I like to use these paint pens quite a lot now. I've got a very pale green. This is what I had near me, so I'm just going to use it. It's from the pastel set, and it's the number 5 in case you do have them. Again, I'm using colored paint pens. You don't need to. Well, for the dotted effect, maybe more so, but for the grass effect, you could use a Posca if that's what you have, or if you have any other white paint pen or in like an ivory paint pen, you can use that. And then you can use your pencil over the top just to give it the color you want. So say you used a white paint pen, you can then use your light shade of green that you'd use, so the May green, for example, and just color over the paint pen to give you the green. Make the paint pen look green. But I'm using the Tooli-art pastel number 5, which is a very pale green, and then I've pulled out a yellow and a pink to help me give effects, a bit of pop of color, effects of like little flowers on the grass. So I have from the yellow set, number 2, and from the reds set, number 20. Now I've chosen these because they're bright, so if you have the earth tone and the pastel tone, you won't get very bright colors. So for this effect, I would usually go for bright colors. All right, so now the first thing I use is the pastel green, number 5. And like I said, what I do is I basically block out or emphasize the highlights of the grass blades that the artist has drawn in. So I'm covering up those black lines, sort of emphasizing that there's grass blades standing up. You can add your own if you need to. Right now, there's quite a few grass blades that Teresa Goodridge has added in this section. So I'm just first following it. And then I will see if I want to add any more if I need to. I think she's added quite a few. But if there were large areas where there was nothing, you could add in your own grass blades just by doing sort of flicks like that if you wanted. I'm just following her squiggles right now, but you can just sort of flick it, you see? And it looks really nice up against, for example, the decking leg there. Like if you add in those little Posca details, you're sort of creating that effect of their, you know, real grass that around an object they would usually just sort of sprout out, don't they? So I like doing those kind of effects. It just gives a little bit extra to your page, a little bit, makes it pop a little bit more. So yeah. And like I said, if you're using white or ivory, do the same thing as I'm doing now, and then you can just go over those little specks, little lines you've drawn in with your pencils, yeah? Just to change the color. Now I'm using a very pale green. Maybe I could have used a bit of a darker one actually, or like a more yellow toned one, but that's okay. But like you can see, if what I said, that if you did happen to color over these little areas of highlight with the paint pen, you sort of bring it back. So don't get bogged down by that. So I'm literally just doing, is that grass? Yeah. Is it? Or is it part of the, I'm going to leave it for now. Okay, now here, technically, what I should have done is colored the dog first. And then, so like I've done here around the decking leg, I've colored it in, so I'm able to do the flicks in front of it. So usually my paint pen work comes right at the end of my illustration. So once I've done all my pencil work. So I'm not going to do the effect here, but as you can see how I've done it on the leg there, that's what I would do in front of the dog. But I need to color him in for it to work, because once I put those specks to color around those, I mean, once I do those flicks to color around it will be difficult. So I'll probably just cover it up again and then I'll have to do it again. So I'm not going to bother in those areas because I still need to color him in. But you got the gist of how I would do it around that leg. Same thing with the bird. Maybe I should have colored a bit more of the illustration before I did this video, but hey. So around any object where they're standing, so even around the bird, so again I'll need to color him in, but I guess it's just legs there, so just say we did it. Yeah, you can just sort of, I would also do sometimes a few maybe on the sides of the pebbles, like here. It's a bit hard to see it, but once you color them in and you sort of do a few flecks around maybe the big ones, they would look nice in front of them, just like we did on the leg of the decking. Okay, all right, so I've covered up, and then again here I need to color those details in before I do that, but you sort of get a gist of how I do it. I literally just cover up those areas, and then if there is any area, I think there's plenty here, I don't need to do any more flicks, but say there was a bigger area without any lines or squiggles that the artist has drawn, then I would add my own. Now I'm going in with my yellow first, no reason why, but just literally going in with the bright yellow to now create the effect of the little flowers, just to break up the green and give a little bit of a pop. So I literally just take a bright yellow and I dot, yeah. I forgot to say something, I also use white. I'm going to have to get my white paint pen, but basically I'll just show you a small section of how I do this. Okay, my white paint pen, I'm just going to use my Posca. This is what I have here. So I use white, I don't know why I forgot to say it, but I use white, yellow and pink usually. But you can use blues, you can use purples, you can use anything you want, whatever flower color you want, depending on what color you're doing the surroundings. But I had these paint pens, so I thought I'd show you these. This is what I used on the top. So I'm just going to keep it uniform. Yeah, so when I do the dots, I use more white than the other colors because it's more of a highlight. So it gives that more of a pop, I think. So, or more of a highlight with white. So I use a lot more white dots. You know, just dot them around the little flicks of grass that you've done. Okay. Maybe I won't sit here doing all of it. So there we go. So you sort of get an idea of what I'm doing. So we've done the white, and then, so usually I would do the white. I don't know why I wasn't thinking. And then I'll do a lot of white dots, and then I'll do little clusters of like the other colors, like little random dots, see, of like the pink, little cluster of pink, maybe one or two somewhere, yeah, just to give a bit of color. But a lot of the dots would be the white to give it a bit of a highlight, and this is just to give it a bit more color to the page and to break up those the large area of green grass that we would have. So again, if you have a small area, you probably wouldn't do this, but with pictures like this from Teresa Goodridge's, where there's a lot of landscapes, a lot of scenes, it's worth just, you know, sometimes it just makes it look a little bit prettier when you break up the green with some color. So I'm just going in because I covered up some of those yellows with my white, just doing a few dots here and there. Make a separate cluster of yellow and then dot them randomly. Okay, how does that look, guys? So basically that's what I would do for the rest of those little little flicks of grass that we've done, and that just adds a bit of interest, doesn't it, to your grass? So yeah, I like to do my grass like that in areas that are large, just to break up all the greenery that will be there. For example, on the top here, I did do it, and I think it's quite good that I did it here because obviously we have the bushes, which will be green, we have the tree that will be green, we'll have the green leaves coming from these flowers, and so I thought it would look nice just sort of breaking up the green grass with a little bit of those highlights of colors, the whites, the pinks, the yellows, and I think it looks quite nice here as well. And so that's how I do my grass, guys. I hope that's been useful. I know it's pretty simple. I keep things simple. I'm not an artist. I've just learned from coloring and how I like things looking. And so yeah, just to summarize, literally the main thing is 3 colors: dark tone, medium tone, light tone. And then if you want to add all that additional depth, then have another darker shadow and maybe another color to give interest, like the light yellow ochre. And then the paint pens just to help finish it off and give those little flicks of grass that are rising around objects and things like that. And it just looks pretty, doesn't it? So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed that video. Hopefully it wasn't too simple a video, and yeah, for those of you who had requested it, I hope you've found it interesting. All right, well, I'll see you guys next time, hopefully with another video soon, and until then, take care. Thank you for watching as always, and bye bye.